Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Now remember, in these videos, we take 6 used firearms that have come into our store, either through the front door or through our website, WeBuyGuns.com, and give you about a 5-minute review or so of each to give you guys an idea of some different stuff out there on the market. General format is we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses, so if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around. That's coming up now. Alright, first up we have an interesting pistol that comes to us from a local customer, so big thank you for selling this one. This is the Colt Police Positive Special, this one chambered in .38 Smith & Wesson, or at .38 Colt New Police, which is effectively the same thing. The Colt New Police is a .38 Smith & Wesson war with a flattened projectile, but I'll talk about that as we go through this. Now, this was an early jab at swing-out revolver technology from Colt. If we go back to the 1870s, Colt had enjoyed most exclusivity on the market of being one of the dominant players with the bore-through cylinder self-contained pistol cartridge with the Colt single-action Army. Now, when the Roll White patent would expire in about 1871, 1872, Colt would quickly get to work on coming out with the single-action Army technology. Now, previous to that, Smith & Wesson had exclusivity to that patent, and they had used it in a lot of their revolvers, but their most popular was their number 3 large frame. Now, the thing about those two dominant revolvers is they had more or less fixed cylinders. Of course, you could remove the cylinders for maintenance, cleaning, repair, things like that, but during operation and use, the cylinders would remain fixed. With the single-action Army, you would load it via a side-loading gate. Through the number 3 pattern of Smith & Wesson, it would break open. It's a break-top revolver that you would load and then close and then fire. Now, by about the 1890s, militaries and police around the world are thinking, okay, this revolver technology is great, but we need to get more into the modern era. Semi-automatic technology was also looming at this time, so how could we make revolvers easier to load and unload? So Colt would actually come out with swing-out revolver technology, and this would come about in the early 1890s with things like the new Army and new Police revolvers. Now, the concept was great, however, because it was early sort of design technology, the frames were not heavily reinforced, which led them to be loaded in more anemic cartridges like .38 caliber cartridges and such. Now, the United States would adopt these and take them into the Spanish-Moro War, where they would find again that the technology of the cartridges were a little bit too anemic, especially against like Moro fighters wearing layered military garb, etc. So they would quickly get the single-action armies back out of mothballs and the more potent .45 Colt and use them until there was a stopgap later on. Now, in military application, the more small cartridge type technology and application was not great. Okay, again, because you're going up against heavily armed combatants. Now, where smaller caliber technology is okay is within police application. A small .32 Smith & Wesson, for example, or even .32 automatics used in PPs and PPKs were used up through the 1950s and 1960s in Europe. So smaller calibers are okay for catching, perch snatchers or trying to apprehend somebody and take them to prison for petty theft or things like that. You're not going up against, machine gun emplacements and stuff when you're just looking at, keeping the peace on your local city streets, especially around those times. Okay, again, this is prior to SWAT teams and GSG-9 and all of that. So what Colt was doing was they were pivoting this type of technology to the police market, and in 1896 they would come out with the Colt New Police. It was chambered in .32 New Police, which was effectively a flat-nosed version of the .32 Smith & Wesson long, and it was seeing a lot of success. Now, with police departments, they wanted some added safety features with the hammer, so that they would add a positive lockup safety feature within the revolver, also reinforcing the frame and coming out with different calibers as well. So in 1905, Colt would release the Colt Police Positive, again because of that positive lockup safety, that hammer block safety that they had added to the design. Now, that was also very popular, but even though it was offered in calibers like .38 Smith & Wesson, .32 long, again, they wanted something a little bit more robust, especially this new .38 special cartridge that was coming out. So Colt would redesign that revolver by lengthening the cylinder and further reinforcing the frame. And you have the Colt Police Positive Special, which would come out in 1907, which is what this is. Colt would end up making about 75,000 of these units, and this, along with the Colt Official Police, which is actually a rebranded Colt Army Special through about the 1920s and 30s, those would make up the dominant players with police application and use. Now, of course, there was then and still is rivalry between Colt and Smith & Wesson, Smith & Wesson having the Model 10 in the same cartridge. Between those three revolvers, that was the makeup of what most law enforcement departments were using here in the United States up until about the 80s and 90s when they start looking at now semi-automatic technology for police force application. We saw that with the emergence of the Smith & Wesson third generation family of semi-auto pistols that we talked about a couple weeks ago. Now, one interesting further caveat to this pistol is this one is marked RHKP, which is Royal Hong Kong Police, with an identification number here. Now, these were issued to the Hong Kong police departments used between about the 1970s and 1980s, and in about the 90s to 2000s, they came into the U.S. commercial market as surplus. So you could find them around. Noted as having these sort of diamond checkered plastic grips and a more dull type finish here, and always noted as also being a little bit more heavily worn. Now, through their police application and doctrine, you would pick one of these up in the morning before your shift, and you would wear it with just the 6 rounds chambered into the cylinder, and then at the end of your shift, you would turn it back into the armory and then go home. Higher-ranking police officials in Hong Kong would be able to retain a self-defense revolver, typically a little bit shorter, 2 1/4-inch barrel. This one's a 4, but your general plainclothes police officer would only check this out of the armory while on duty, checking it back in at the end of the shift. So different officers could use these, which is also why it was important to have the identification number on the back. And while there was, a lot of holster wear and things like that on these, lanyard loop was standard as well. Very cool revolvers on the market today. The police positives are pretty common, but Colt collectors like to get their hands on them. You might find them in excellent condition, topping off at the $600 or $700 range. This, with Hong Kong police provenance in this condition, might be somewhere in the $400 to $500 range or so. Anyway, very cool revolver. Happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. That is the Colt Police Positive Special. All right, up next is somewhat of a forgotten pistol that comes to us from a customer in Florida. So big thank you for selling us this one. This is the Beretta 92, spelled 90TWO, and it was an intermediary between the 92FS and the M9A1, having some features of both. Now, in about 1982, the military would adopt the M9 service pistol, or the commercial 92FS, and the design would go pretty much unchanged through the 80s and the 90s. Now, by the early 2000s, Beretta wanted to modernize the design, so they would come up with a series of revisions that they would apply to the 92FS series for the commercial and law enforcement markets, and they would dub it the 90TWO, or 92. Now, they would stick with the original sort of aluminum alloy frame concept with the steel slide, but they would do a series of revisions to the stylizing of the pistol and also to the feature set that was offered on the handgun to bring it into the modern age. For example, you have more swooped lines and sort of a deletion of sharp points on the slide. You have these nice cuts into the slide serrations in the back, nice cuts into the hammer, a shortened and rounded beaver tail, a rounded trigger guard as opposed to the earlier squared version, really nice cuts and rounding into the frame. And then they made 2 sort of basic changes to the frame itself. A is they would add this accessory rail here to the bottom, which is again a holdover feature that they would keep on the A1. And so you could put any type of your lights or lasers or attachments. And you had a dust cover that was meant to actually lock into the rail section itself. If I can get this right, there it goes. Snaps right in place and stays put. If you don't want to use the rail, it keeps those sharp edges rounded off again and keeps dust and grime out of the grooves of the rail section as well. Also, you have the introduction of an interchangeable backstrap system. We see this come back with the M9A3, and I'll talk about that. You have a standard grip set that meets the original grip contours and grip stylizing of the original Beretta M9 or 92FS, but you could go larger or smaller, down to about the width of a 1911 or up to a more aggressive and fatter grip contour if you have larger, beefier hands. Now, you lose some of the texturing on the grip, and that was one of the downfalls of this design, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it was an earlier jab by Beretta at an interchangeable backstrap system, which they had used on the PX4 series. Smith & Wesson with the M&P series was playing with this. Glock would later go into it with the 4th generation series as well. The slide was steel again. You have the aluminum alloy frame. And this was released in about 2006. Now, it had a beginning launch price of about $700, which is a little bit more expensive than the base M9 at the time. It didn't meet a whole lot of success. One of the things that a lot of people complained about was the grip contour itself. You only had one grip module that came with the gun, so you would have to purchase replacements. At already an expensive price point is $700, is starting to get this thing up there in price at the time compared to its other contemporaries in around the 2005 timeframe. Also, you don't have a lot of grip texture on this, so people who don't really like the more slippery nature of the grip, if your hand starts getting perspiration or moisture on it, these actually are pretty slippery and slick. And also, this sort of polymer thing makes it feel a little bit more chintzy and cheap, and I think that those are some of the reasons that this did not do well. Now, quickly, Beretta would go back to the drawing board and try and come up with an even more modernized design. They would keep successful elements of this pistol. Like, one of the things a lot of people liked was the rail. A lot of other designs are going to adding rails as well, so they would keep that when they released the M9 and 96A1 series in 2010. The more rounded elements, of course, were popular, but they would go back to traditional M9 slide designs and the M9 grip, double grip panel module on the grips itself. And they would release that in 2010. Now, they would manufacture these side by side, the M9A1 and the 92 series, for a period of 2 years. That was 2010 to 2012. And these were completely outcompeted by the M9A1. You would actually start seeing sales on these at $500 plus rebates just to move old stock of these because nobody seemed to really want them. So by about 2012, they discontinued production of this, sticking solely with the M9A1. Then when they would release the M9A3 in about 2016, they would come back out with the grip module concept. Of course, adding different features, threaded barrels and things like that, and it took on well there. But this was an early attempt at that, and this is a pistol that a lot of people forget ever really came out, again, because it wasn't very successful. Other than that, it's got your basic M9 features. A double single action, you could get them with either the single or the double stack. Capacity made in 40 and 9mm with the same magazine interchangeability with the earlier and later M9 series pistols. Nice feeling, good trigger, 3-dot sights. They made them with night sights as well. This particular one is in excellent condition with original box. I believe it actually came with 3 magazines as new. But very cool pistol. Now on the market today, because these are not manufactured, they've gone up a little bit in price. I've seen the 40s kind of hover around the $700 mark. The 9s go a little bit more than that, maybe about $800 or so. Mainly just as a collectible, again, because they are not manufactured anymore. And for people who want the true lineup of the Beretta pistols, the M9, the 92FS, the 92, the M9A1, the A3, the A4, this actually technically is in there and would bridge the gap between where they would go from the M9 series to modernize it into the M9A1 and later variations. This was a step in there for the pistol design. So very cool pistol. Happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. That is the Beretta 92. All right, up next we have an interesting firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Florida. So big thank you for selling us this one. This is the FN PS90. It is a semi-automatic civilian version of the P90, which itself is a personal defense weapon, or PDW, or submachine gun class weapon. Now, the story with this would actually begin in 1985 with NATO putting out a solicitation for a new modern personal defense weapon for second-line type infantry use. This is going to be for people who do not have the primary responsibility of carrying around a full-size battle rifle for their respective military. This would be people like vehicle drivers, artillery personnel, cooks, mechanics, clerks, medical personnel, aircraft operators, people like that, who need something that's going to have good, adequate, ready firepower, but isn't going to get in the way of them performing their normal tasks and duties. Now, the philosophy of this has been around militaries really ever since the implementation of firearms in general. There has always been secondary, second-line type personnel in every military, going back to even the days of the Revolutionary War or the Napoleonic times or the American Civil War. And typically these personnel are supplied with general handguns, just standard sidearms with no shoulder stocks. Now, through about the Revolutionary War to the Civil War to about World War I, what you start to see is something like this. Now, this is, again, I'm going to reference for my personal collection. In World War I, Germany started issuing things like this. This is the C96 broom handle Mauser with a slightly longer barrel and a holster that doubles as a shoulder stock. They had fully automatic versions of these with detachable box magazines called the Schnellführer, which in and of itself is a quick deploy submachine gun, if you will, personal defense weapon. Something that, like the artillery, could carry easily on their belt in the holster, out of their way, freeing up their hands to load and fire their artillery pieces. But if they get overrun or attacked, they can quickly assemble this, and they have much superior firepower over something like a P08 Luger or just a standard 6-shot revolver. In World War II, the United States would come up with a different type of PDW. This is a carbine Williams derived and Winchester completed M1 carbine chambered in a slightly smaller round than what the typical standard issue rifles, the 1903 and M1 Garand, were issued with. 15 round detachable box magazine. Later iterations of this were select fire. Very lightweight at around 5 to 6 pounds loaded, which again, people could carry around slung over their shoulders, stick in the passenger seat of the truck they're driving out of their way so they can focus on their daily task. But if they are overrun, this is better than just carrying around a 1911. Through the Cold War, you see this type of idea permeate even further across the globe. This is a Czechoslovakian designed VZ61 Scorpion. We took a look at one of these a couple weeks ago. Has a quick deploy stock. This one's an SBR, registered SBR. Chambered in .32 automatic, feeding from a detachable 20 round box magazine of fully automatic select fire with a quick deploy stock. So as collapsed, this would fit in a holster that would go right on the belt of the operator of the tank or the vehicle that this would be issued to. If they get overrun, really good firepower, way better than carrying around a CZ82 pistol. So when NATO would come up with the ultimate idea of this, they would have some requirements in mind. They wanted it to leave the operator being pretty much hands-free when this was not in use. Something that could be put in a chest rig or a shoulder rig or just a sling slung on the back or in a mount inside of a vehicle, unobtrusive, out of the way, freeing up the user's hands to do what their daily task is. If they get in a bad situation, they have a tremendous amount of firepower. Now, things of the era were like the MP5 or Uzis and 9mm. The other idea was we need a cartridge that's not necessarily a full battle round or an intermediate cartridge, but something that's going to be lightweight, easy to carry a lot of rounds, but is going to offer more stopping power and lethality than just a pistol round like a 9mm or 45. So with that, FN would develop the 5.7 by 28mm. It's a screamer of a round, super fast velocity, and armor piercing with the right round. A lot of ammunition could be carried. It is lightweight, and because of its low caliber nature, it has very soft recoil. You can feed it in a 50 round detachable box magazine, nestled right here into the top of the firearm again, not leaving stick mags protruding in different areas to catch on web gear or slings, nestled right out of the way. Nice rounded features to go along with that, which just gives you a standard boxy type of component. The military version's barrel stopped about right here. This is a 16-inch barrel to comply with the American barrel SBR type laws. And it is a bullpup, so the barrel fits also inside the receiver. 2 clamshelled polymer receiver halves screwed together around a steel barrel and bolt assembly. You have a super lightweight, very convenient package in full auto, offering a lot of firepower and a very potent cartridge. This is what was landed on, this is what FN produced, and this is probably still best in class today. In 2005, FN would come out with a civilian version of this in semi-automatic with a 16-inch barrel called the PS90. That's what this is, and it is still manufactured today. In excellent condition, you should be able to find these used for about the $1,400 to $1,500 range or so. And again, new, you find a little bit more than that, maybe close to $2,000. But a very, very cool firearm, fun firearm to SBR as well. File your Form 1 and chop the barrel down. It's actually a barrel sleeve here you can remove. But very cool firearms. Happy to get this one in and share it with you. This is the FN PS90. Okay, up next we have an interesting firearm that comes to us from a local customer, so big thank you for selling us this one. This is the Astra Model 600-43, and it comes from Spain. It is a 9mm Luger, feeding from a single stack detachable box magazine. Now the predecessor to this would be the Astra Model 400, which was similar to this but scaled up slightly and chambered in 9mm Largo, which is a popular cartridge used by Spain at the time. Now the Astra 400 would come out of a direct need for Spain to move into a more modern semi-automatic service sidearm, which they would do in about the 1920s. Now, the Astra Model 400 would serve very well within the Spanish military through the 20s and the 30s and the early 40s, but by about the late 1930s, we start seeing Germany is actually growing, rearming, and starts to invade other European countries. By 1939, they are invading Poland, moving through Belgium, France, and the rest of Europe is basically either under occupation or imminent threat from the expansionism of Nazi Germany at the time. Now, because of the very quick spread the need for occupational forces and military arms by Germany at the time, they would either occupy foreign arms manufacturing plants in the countries that they had invaded, such as Belgium. If you look at their use of the P-35 high power and the Model 1922, moving through France, taking the SACM pistols, Poland with the Viz-35, or countries that they were either allied with or not aggressive towards, such as Spain, they would look at contracting with their service military equipment. So they would actually look at the Spanish Astra Model 400. They were very impressed with the design. It was actually very robust, very reliable, and held up under heavy use. However, Germany did not have a use for the 9mm Largo cartridge. All of Germany's small arms were chambered in the standard 9mm Luger 9x19mm, such as their Lugers, later the P38s, the MP40s, the MP38s, and so on. So Germany would try and work with Astra to come up with a slightly scaled down version, chambered in 9mm, that they can use as a supplemental sidearm for places like the Luftwaffe or other occupational forces. Now in 1943 they would get to work and Astra would come out with this design. Again, it is very much like the Astra 400, just slightly smaller and chambered in the German-used 9mm Luger. Now, Germany was very happy with it, so they would contract with Astra to make about 60,000 units. And by late 1943, Astra would get to work and start coming out with early deliveries of these pistols for Nazi Germany. Now, Spain, obviously, being on the other side of France, had a direct route through France to deliver these pistols to Germany. So Spain would manufacture them, they would deliver them where they would be inspected by German, the Waffenmasters, or I believe the, arms inspectors, and they would be stamped with the German, Waffenamt inspection marks and then be folded into German military service. Now in June of 1944, you have the very large-scale American, British, Canadian, basically the Allied invasion of northern France, and France therefore would be occupied by the Allied forces, and that direct route for these pistols to be delivered would be cut off. So somewhere around serial number 10,000 to 11,000, these would stop making it to France. Now Spain, because they were actually paid in full for these pistols, would complete the entire contract. However, they could not deliver them to Germany, so they would sit in warehouses for most of the war in Spain. Now, after World War II, Spain would look to liquidate this very large collection of Astra 400s, so they would sell them to other European military and police forces, mainly the German Bundeswehr and the German police forces following World War II into the Cold War. Now, in about the 70s or 80s, these would be mainly obsolete, and they would come into the United States market and other foreign markets as military surplus, which is likely what happened with this one. Now, this one is in around the 14,000 range, so did not see World War II German military use, but it was built as part of that contract of 50 to 60,000 pistols. So very, very interesting handgun. Now, on the market today, the actual German marked guns are going to bring a little bit more of a premium just because of the collectability there. You might see those in about the $700-800 plus range. Something like this in this condition, maybe between about $500 and $600. So very interesting firearm. Very happy to get this one in and share it with you. That is the Astra Model 400-43. All right, up next we have a very interesting and iconic pistol that comes to us from a local customer. This is a Remington Rand manufactured Model 1911A1. This one made in 1943 for American World War II service. Now, this is a 45 ACP pistol feeding from a single stack detachable box magazine. It is single action only, as 1911s are. Semi-automatic in nature. Very, very cool collectible handguns. The story with this would actually begin around the turn of the century, when the United States, just like every other country around the world, is considering moving into semi-automatic handgun technology, replacing the old antiquated revolvers of the past. Now, in the late 1890s, we had discussed that the United States was working with new swing-out cylinder type technology and trying to modernize the revolver design, but due to earlier frame tolerances and cylinder sizes and early cartridges that were available, the early entrants into this market, such as the new Navy and the new Army models of the 1890s, were too anemic for their requirements of military service. We saw this in the Moro War as well. When the 38 caliber rounds were just not sufficient enough to fight the Moro fighters. So because of that, they had pulled the single action armies chambered in 45 Colt back out of mothballs and used them in military service until they could find something to supplement their military contracts with a new suitable sidearm and a larger caliber. Now, they had gone to 45 caliber revolvers to supplement 1911 production early on in the early stages of World War I, but mostly by this part, the United States was looking at moving into a semi-automatic service sidearm. Now, John Moses Browning had been working with a series of revisions over his semi-automatic 45 caliber pistol design, and in about 1910, he would land on this design here. It actually looked more like this. This one's mine. This is a World War I era Colt manufactured in 1911. Now, the United States military would actually look at this design. They would accept it in 1911, as the name would suggest, and it would go into military production. Now, by about 1914, with the offset of World War I, there were not enough of these to go around. So again, they were supplemented by revolvers such as the Colt and the Smith & Wesson Model 1917s, also chambered in 45 ACP. Now, this pistol would serve well through the First World War. It had been copied by other countries, with its locking link, Browning locking link system, but used typically more in the European 9mm and countries abroad. That this design would stand the test of time, being in military service all the way up until the early 1980s. Now, in the interwar period, they would look at modernizing their military equipment. The 1911 pistol would be no exception to that. So they would look at making a series of revisions to the design. One is they would scallop the inside of the frame here, which you see this is really straight cut here. They would scallop this in here. They go to a more, militarized type parkerized finish, a little bit cheaper and easier to produce, and a little bit rugged, more rugged than the standard bluing of the World War I era. They would get rid of these diamond cut wood panel grips, which are a little bit more complicated to produce, in place of these keys fibrite type resin material grip panels. They would go to a slightly more bulged mainspring housing as opposed to the flatter mainspring housing here. They would shorten the trigger. That's also another huge identifier of an A1 configuration. They would narrow the hammer spur, and that was about it. There might be a couple other subtle changes that they had made, but they had mainly cheapened and refined the design. Now, by the Second World War, you had four principal contractors. You had Remington Rand, Colt, Ithaca, and Union Switch and Signal. Now, Singer Sewing Machine Company also made a handful of these, very rare, made about 500. They were quickly moved on to other war production tasks due to their very fine and elegant machining on their pistols that they had produced. Remington Rand, which is what this is, made the most of them, followed by Colt, followed by Ithaca, followed by Union Switch and Signal. These would stay in service and be the primary service sidearm through World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, and then in 1982 would be replaced by the Beretta M9. Now, on the market today, World War II service 1911s are becoming somewhat collectible. Now, this one's in okay condition. There's just a little bit of pitting in certain areas. The finish appears to be original. Took it apart, and actually the frame and the slide and everything are correct. It is all, not Ithaca, but Remington Rand frame and receiver with the appropriate markings on the barrel as well. Post-war magazine. But, something like this in this condition, I would say it's correct, but probably more in the, shooter grade condition of things. Is typically going to be in around the $1,000 to $1,200 mark, somewhere around in there. But still a very cool, 1911 from that period, very collectible and historic piece. So anyway, very happy to get this one and share it with you. This is a Remington Rand manufactured 1943 World War II service 1911 A1. Okay, last but definitely not least, we have a very collectible early pre-ban AK that comes to us from a viewer in Louisiana. So big thank you for selling us this. This is a Polytech AK S762, and it is the side-folding version with the Bakelite furniture. Now, Polytech and Norinco would make a version of their AK series of rifles like this. Of course, as mentioned, this is the one brought in by Polytech, or exported by Polytech, I should say. The story with this would begin in about the early 1980s. The U.S. commercial market at this time is actually lacking good options for AK-47s or AKMs. Now, still being involved in the Cold War at this time, towards the latter end of that, there is a lot of interest in the U.S. consumer markets for the AK pattern. They're being shown in movies and in the news and things like that, so there is an interest for people to want to purchase them. Now, early entrants into the market were things like the Steyr imported Madi AKs, which were exceedingly expensive and still are today, and the Valmet rifles coming out of Finland, which did kind of carry some of the aesthetics of the AK and were functionally AK patterns, but didn't have the sort of con block type appearance and look, and they were also very expensive. So by about the mid-1980s, a couple of Chinese arms export conglomerates, Polytech and Norinco, realized that there is a market for these products here in the United States. So through a series of factories in China, they would export semi-automatic versions, and Norinco and Polytech would export those models here to the U.S. And U.S.-made or U.S.-based importers, such as King's, which is what I believe this one is, KFS, in Atlanta, would bring them into the United States and sell them. Now, one of the great things about these Chinese AKs is they were pretty affordable. At the time, they were around the $400 range or so, which pales in comparison to the very high, well over $1,000 price tag, and this is in 1980s dollars, of the other variants that I had previously mentioned. People absolutely like these. Of course, early on, they had the stigma of being cheap Chinese junk, but they would actually prove the test of time, and today they are regarded as some of the best manufactured AKs that you can purchase on the market today, and there's quite a following and collector's market on them today. Now, through about the mid to late 1980s, these would be very popular firearms. They were made in many different configurations, such as fixed stock, folding stocks, those with spiker bayonets, Polytech Legends with the milled receivers, more in the AK-47 format. You have stamped receiver AKMs like this, the side folding stocks, just lots of different variants out there. Now, in 1989, there was an unfortunate event called the Stockton Schoolyard Shooting, where a psychopath took actually a Norinco AK onto a playground in Stockton, California, and shot a bunch of children and a couple teachers. Now, because of that, then President George Bush Sr. would enact a sporting importation restriction on firearms like this, and by imported firearms had to have a sporting purpose to be here in the United States. So things like this would actually be cut from importation after only having been brought into the country for about 4 or 5 years. Now, Norinco would come out with a post-import ban version in 1990 called the Mac 90. It was functionally the same AK as these, but it had the import restriction features such as a thumbhole stock, non-threaded barrel, no bayonet lug, the evil features like that. Now, those would come into the country until about 1994, when they would be stopped by the assault weapons ban, the Bill Clinton assault weapons ban of 1994, which would later sunset in 2004. So because of that, again, these Norinco and Polytech AKs have a pretty short history of coming into the country. There are not, there were a good number of them that were imported, but because they haven't been brought into the country in several decades, they are pretty uncommon on the market today and do command somewhat of a premium. Now, the side-folding version was never actually like this, was never really adopted by China for their military service. This is more of a commercial export model with the side folder on it. But this is one of the more desirable of the Polytech and Norinco imported Chinese AKs, just because probably there were fewer of them that were brought in. The iconic sort of, Bakelite furniture just has a lot of nice curb appeal, and people definitely like them. On the market today, in excellent condition, they tend to go in about the $3,000 range. And Norincos go for a little bit more. I think there were slightly fewer of them. The quickest way you can tell is it has a more swooped pistol grip. We actually had one of those not too long ago, but they seem to be going up in recent years in terms of value. So anyway, very cool firearms. Very happy to get this one and share it with you guys. And this is an excellent one to end out this video on. This is a Polytech AK S762 Bakelite side folder. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. I'm going to leave you guys off there. I am Chris with WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and we will see you next time.